Hello, I'm going to show you how easy it is to get started with the WinListView control. So you've seen the list view control in many types of applications. The most popular one being Windows Explorer when you're navigating through the file system, and the view that you see on the right hand side of the UI where you see the actual files, which you can switch to the different views such as details view, list view, tile view, thumbnail view, all those views. That's what the list view is. So to get started in this particular form, I pre-written some code to make this video a little bit easier to digest. So to get started, locate the Win or the Ultra List View control, which is right over here. The Ultra List View, double click it, get an instance of that on the form. And one of the things that I wanted to explain is that the list view control accepts item objects. So you basically add list view item objects to its collection of items, and you do that programmatically. So let's say if you're populating this with data items from a database, you just iterate through your result set and just keep adding items, setting properties, which I'll show you the code how to do that. Or if you have code which blasts through your file system and grabs a collection of files and you want to visualize them, like in order to create or reproduce a Windows Explorer-like view, you do the same thing. You just get whatever data it is that you're flipping through and map the properties of your object model to the columns that you define for each list view item. And each list view item's column can also receive an Infragistics iProvides embeddable editor control. So to have a little bit of fun in this example, I want to grab the Ultra Progress bar. So if I locate that right here, the Ultra Progress bar is this guy right here, and I've already written some code behind the scenes, but I'm not going to see this at runtime on the form. It'll be embedded within the items. So what I can do is send this to back, and what I'll do is I'll dock the list view control. So let's set the dock property to fill on this one. This is a very simple UI just to show you how to use the list view. So I will now go to the code behind real quick and explain, and I'm putting all this in the form loaded event. In a real application you may want to distribute this and set it up in a more elegant way, but this is just for this example. Okay, first thing you need to do is configure the main column. If you can visualize the APIs for this, for the columns that define each list view items, it starts off with the main column, and it's the listview.mainColumn. You can give it a key so that you can programmatically identify it. This one is going to be called file. A very important property, you must always set the data type on each column. You need to do that because if you don't, nothing will show up. You must absolutely set the data type of the main column and any subsequent columns that you add. Otherwise, you could keep adding items and it will not show up. At least that's what happens with me. And then you set the text property, which will be rendered as the column header text. So this will be the user-friendly name. So you could even, in this case, let me just keep this consistent. So I'll give it just capital letters, single capital letters for each column key to keep it simple. So then you go through and programmatically add columns. So I'm going to add one column right here. So the way you add columns is in the sub-item columns collection. That's how you do this. You could add it there. Here's one. You set the data type, set the format, and then you set the header text. It's called text, but it's actually, for me to think about this and remember it easier, I think of this as the header text. Then you add another one and another one, as you see here. Now in this particular case, I'm configuring the progress bar to have a minimum value of 0 and a maximum value of 100. And then once I add my column here and I set its type to int, and notice that the column.editor component, just like WinGrid and any other Infragistics iProvides embeddable editor receiving control has as a property. You set the editor component directly to the instance of the iProvides embeddable editor implementing control that's on the form. So that's how you set that up. And now to add items, I've again written this code previously, so you don't have to sit there and watch me write everything out. So I start off by declaring a list view item, so that way we can reuse that reference. So then you call the list view .items.add method, then you pass in the key of the item and a value that will be displayed in the main column cells. So that's what displays here. Whatever you place as a second parameter, you see in the overload basically the key of the actual item as well as the object value. Key should be definitely unique, and if you're working with file system stuff, usually you can pass in the full path to the file, like full path and file name to your file, and you don't have to include the drive letter if you don't want to, but you can, just to be sure. That's what you can use for uniqueness. And then if this is actually a file, you can give it the file name, and that will be the text displayed in the cell of the main column. Then the sub-items are the additional columns outside of the main column, and then you just set the value, set the value, set the value. And I think, in my personal opinion, that list view items work great with images. So this is how you set the image. All I did was, in this example, I just threw a couple of images so that they render within the output directory, but there's plenty of code that you can write out there with different types of techniques to extract an image from a file, or extract the default icon of the program used to launch that. There's many different code snippets out there on the internet. I've done a lot of apps where I just grab some freely available code where you pass in a file and it returns the image of the icon of the program associated with that file type. And then if you wanted to do something like, I've done work with video files or images where if it's an image, you just grab a small thumbnail of that and you generate a bitmap from it and you assign it to this. Or if you're working with video files, you could write code out there to open up the video, navigate to a certain point in the video, grab the screenshot, and return that as an image. So there's all sorts of fancy things you could do. But in this one I just kept it simple to make the video easier. So I'm adding one item, a second item, and a third item. And then finally, a very important property of the list view is the style, or the view property, which is basically the ultra list view style enumeration. Details, icons, list, thumbnails, and tiles. So let's start off with details, and when I run this app, we'll see what it looks like. So here it is, details view, you get all of the columns visible. So you could sort these guys right here. Notice the icon is showing up, the text in the main column. This is the main column. These are the sub-columns right here. Notice how the progress bar is embedded in there, and because I set a min value of 0, max of 100, and then I set a value to the actual sub-items column size of 45, 50, and 90, it's rendering it accordingly, and the bar is drawing because it's sucking its value property from the cell. And the owner, I set the owner as the same here. So this is basically how it works. And if I were to close this out, and let's say if I switch to a different view, let's go to icons view and run it again. A more appropriate approach to this would be having, let's say you want to use our Infragistics Win Toolbars Manager, or the Toolbars Manager set up to display as the ribbon control on your form. You might want to have a mutually exclusive list of state buttons in there, so when you click on each one, it just flips through the different states. Now notice how these guys look a little different now. Now it's like that second view. And if I were to jump to this one right here, list is a plain old list that actually wraps around. So list, think of list as the details view but without the additional columns. And if I were to do this, see how now it wraps around and scrolls over. So that's how the list works. Just a little carefully, scroll down a little bit more. So that's what list is all about. And let's go to the other one here, thumbnails. Thumbnails is this view right here. We have larger view of the thumbnails. You could adjust the size of these as well. And finally, tiles. So when I run tiles, you get this right here. So you get different tiles with text from the main column. So list view is very powerful control that you can use this in many different scenarios. So now that you have the basic idea of how to set it up, you could come up with really great looking, list view control views for all your data. You could also do editing in this as well. So, and like what you can do with most of the Infragistics APIs, there's always a tag property. So if you ever wanted to take, let's say, in the past what I've done was, let's say if I used a file or directory info objects or whatever it was that I was doing, I would always stuff the instance of that object in the tag property, so that if I ever had to like delete a file, because you could, remember, you could do a lot of things with this. For example, you could set up a right-click context menu, and when you select from a list of items, you can select delete or rename or do whatever. And whenever you do that, you're basically working with the actual file itself. So that's why it's convenient to stuff the relevant objects that you use to retrieve and operate the data in the tag, so that you could pull it out of the tag, perform your operations by invoking the methods on that object, and then being done with it, and then refreshing the view if you wanted to. So that's some of the practices that you can implement with this. So now that you know how this works, you should go out there and see where you can use this in your application, because I'm sure there's plenty of areas where you can leverage this very powerful control.
Infragistics. On the web at infragistics.com.